Right.
Oh, yeah. So is that true, Suzanne? Were you thinking about irritable people?
No. Do you remember we started talking about this a couple of years ago as a joke? Irritable.
Oh.
Did I have a conversation with you or Dana, who's not here?
Dana's absent.
She's absent without leave.
I remember you being teasing about.
I was just noticing a lot of painting at that time that it seemed unfinished, and I think I was thinking maybe of this piece of Molly's, because we were working together then, and that she had a lot of work that looked like it was just thrown together, and she wasn't the only one. There are other students who were dealing with that, and work, because of the way it all fit together, there was a discomfort in the way it appeared. When you put the two pieces together, they didn't quite sit together easily. I own this piece, and I always had trouble hanging it correctly because it always looked like it was crooked on the wall. But those are the things I liked about it, and the pieces in here that I own, Molly's and then Rebecca Morris's, that drawing up there, which is probably not the best frame for it, and then Brian Calvin's piece, and then Joe Baldwin's. These are things, especially Joe's work that he made, I think it was in 1993, and I've owned it since 96, and it was always a piece that I looked at and always thought about the changeability of it. It never looked the same to me, even though it was a very simple piece. So anyway, we were talking about, and I thought it would be fun to do a show about irritable painting, and then we didn't get to it, and this year decided to do it. And it's true, there are certain, I think a lot of artists are very irritable people. And I'm using that in a very broad way. I'm thinking about super sensitive, cranky, a level of very touchy, sometimes awkwardness, sometimes it's manifested personally or in work. And all of this, when artists make work, it comes across in certain paintings, certain drawings or sculptures, and I always want a work of art to look like the person who did it, who made it. There has to be, for me, some kind of meshing between the two. So, that's it. But the question that keeps coming up, a number of people said to me that they didn't think the work looked that irritable. And Dan Devlin said, people have been telling me all along that doesn't look like a very irritable painting. I don't know, what do you think?
Is it over?
Yes, it's finished.
Great.
Well, I think the way you're talking about it are more like touchy, like hypersensitive. Like to me, there's this sort of very there's a sort of very obvious thing about the painting in one sense, in that even though the strokes are sort of peeled off and stuff like that, all the work here seems very revealing. Nothing's really hiding anything that much. And I don't know. With Dan, it's still is still sort of dressed very well or something. So it has this.
It's dressed very well.
Yeah, right. And so it's buried a little bit. Like the irritableness is sort of like Dan.
Yeah,
it's got a nice sharp collar and the glasses.
It's fastidious, right?
Mm-hmm.
And fastidiousness seems like a good way of hiding. It's sort of like covering all of your bases instead of. That's a good way to sort of conceal the.
It's like using the fussiness for good instead of for evil. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It makes me think about glitchiness or something you're fastidious enough, then you don't glitch. If a glitch is like a moment where the needle doesn't touch the record, or where like there's something that's off. That there's something about like touching it every single point, and making something very, very careful that is a good way of concealing glitchiness.
Well, what about something like Eric's painting, which is really sort of very, I guess it's fastidious in the way it's made, but the imagery is so disconcerting.
The color too is disconcerting. It's a very sort of fuzzy, optical, and like as a slow reveal almost. It's like focusing on something in a microscope and then seeing it too close or something.
You know, I was reading before I came here, I was just thinking about this a little bit, because I didn't know what to say. And the silver painting over there by Cheryl Donovan was also, I didn't realize it included in that article. Did any of you read that article by Perry Rubenstein, or what's his name? Raphael Rubenstein, who wrote about provisional abstraction or provisional painting.
Yeah. And
Cheryl was one of the artists that he was talking about also. And I hadn't realized that because as I do most articles, I have to read them, and I didn't realize he was in it. So, but I thought that was interesting. I guess there's something that he was touching on that was sort of unfinished in the provisional nature of art making that I was kind of interested in too. And when I think of some of the people that were in that show, like Wendy White or
hey,
Irritable is just stuck to my hair.
I just got my arm around your pants or something.
So I guess I have some questions for you. You know, it's like abstraction is really, who here considers themselves abstract artists? Anybody? I'm pretty familiar with all your work. I mean, you know, abstraction has huge, it's like a continuum. I mean, you're an abstract artist. Danny, you are too.
Yeah, I guess I just don't fully understand what it means to be an abstract artist.
Yeah.
I think I guess that would be so.
But I mean, you can do representational work.
Chris, you don't know. Yeah, not a chance. You have to raise your hand for that. Is it because it seems aspirational that you would not? Does it seem like I'm probably not abstract yet or something?
You have to achieve it.
Yeah.
Achieve this level of arcana.
Right.
It's not real anymore.
Obscurity.
Yeah.
I have finally
I can
received.
float paintbrushes with like the forest. I guess it sounds like really, I don't know, it sounds so like fine or crystallized, or like, it sounds like so like, abstract artist. I don't know, it sounds like so much like,
To be determined.
Like
Yeah,
a point
maybe.
or something
like an ideal or something.
Like when you use the word abstract, does a kind of painting flash into your?
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
I'm like kind of distrustful of that, like.
What do you think of that?
Like
like an Anne Reinhardt? Or?
yeah, like definitely a painting on canvas on the wall that's like very formally interesting and very clearly non-representational and very about nothing else besides itself.
Is it gestural? Is it hard edge?
I like both, but
At the same time.
it could be. I mean, it just
both
doesn't
flash.
reference. Yeah, it doesn't reference anything other than like how it's made, what it's made out of, what's going on in the picture. And I guess when I think of people talking about abstract artists, it seems like their concerns are much more about the art object and not things outside of it. Besides maybe history, but
So
I consider abstraction slightly differently for myself, so I don't know.
Well, I mean, do you think that this generation of artists really can't make an abstract painting the way, say, a previous generation could?
No, I don't necessarily think that, but I think maybe there's more different types of baggage that they come with play.
Well, it's a lot of, I mean, you're in a position sometimes where you're sort of quoting all the time, don't you?
Yeah. I don't know, yeah, I think you can make it multiple abstract, whatever that would mean. I know it's tough to pin down what that would mean.
I think it's really hard to figure out how to make a painting now. I mean, when I was in school, everybody knew what a painting looked like, or was supposed to look like, and so there were certain kinds of things that you thought about when making a painting. Like if you made it right, then it would fit within this category, so abstraction. And now it just doesn't. I mean, it's just so open that it really, it's kind of hard to do that.
Well, I think it's a sort of a difference between like, yeah, it's
Everyone
like,
looks sad.
We're sad.
there's a point, and then now it seems much more like a range or something, or I mean, I guess like I totally recognize like Dan's vision of like what abstraction like means. Like it's the one that I'm sort of familiar with, but you know, yeah, it's like when things get reprocessed in the present, like they sort of start opening up again, so that you know, or maybe that's a factor of time passing and things not staying the same, not being able to remain like just a fixed point. But then you know, it's like I guess like I didn't think about the show also as like a sort of starting from a point and then just realizing that it's actually a pretty wide spectrum, you know, of things that fall within a certain kind of category. That you know, fussiness or hypersensitivity like is not a static thing. It's like this pretty wide range, you know, and dynamic and moving and shifting and not a destination.
It's chill. Absolutely. Reading that for
I like what you said about like not a destination. Yeah. Or I guess it's like abstraction is not a destination.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's kind of why I didn't really raise my hand or something. It's like I'm not quite sure if it's like if it's something that I go to or I'm going to. I'm more thinking about like I can call my self like a stripper more than like an abstract painter or something. Like I feel like that's something that I can like reach for. Whereas like abstraction is something that's like not, I don't know.
something that is not, what, not attainable, or
not attainable, or like I guess I'm not quite sure even like why I would even reach to attain that or something. I'd rather like I think it's like a sphere that like it's something that encompasses possibly everything that's in here, but like you wouldn't necessarily say each one is like pointing at that sphere. It's like you know.
So how do you know when you make something what it is, or how do you know that this is what you want? Do you have a certain idea? If you don't have some kind of idea or something that you're working towards, does it just happen? Do you just sort of try anything and then wait and see what happens and say, I like it, I don't like it? Or?
Yeah, it's a process of that. But I mean, I think there's like general roadblocks that I've like constructed for myself, and investigating the territory around me to like then be able to like, build on it further. But
I think that the reason I would be like starting to point fingers at almost everybody in this room and say, no, you are an abstract artist, is because of a method of thinking that is completely coming out of abstraction. And I mean, just what you even described, you said what is investigating what's around you or roadblocks. I feel like part of the process of becoming an artist is engaging with this language of abstraction and using it to begin making connections and making a formal language. Like for you, Danny, like yes, you're engaged with issues of representation, but it's all about trying to figure out how to make those issues abstract enough so that they can then be laid onto something else. Like it's about mobilizing language in this way, or you know, creating sort of networks of connections, or having something suddenly because of touch or something else, like suddenly morph into something else, like creating these kinds of transformations or something. And those
Right, and what you're
cool.
describing then is a fidelity to process instead of a fidelity to image.
Right. And that fidelity process then ends up being, the process ends up sort of, it's like this transparent veil of language that then becomes increasingly materialized as your practice moves along. You sort of start lifting off, like, oh, this is what I did. I poured this and I cut this. And then it's suddenly, one day, you say, like, cutting is actually one of the sort of formal aspects of my language. And then it's like, it's appropriation, or it's theft, or it's cutting, but it's that activity of actually using scissors that one day you realize that's appropriation.
And that's process and movement, and that's mortal acting verb, I think. Because
Right.
That's sort of a coefficient of abstraction in general.
Yeah,
It's
but you can have a super representational image, I mean, exquisitely representational, that is an abstraction, actually.
Well, but I think because it begins to use language in this way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I think of Manet as being super abstract in that way, because it's so, they're not pictures of things he saw, they're pictures of thinking processes and ways of approaching culture.
Yeah, but you can say that about anything. Mm-hmm.
But don't you think, yes, I do. Don't you think that's the sort of like, that's an abstraction pulled out of pictures? And
Well, I think that is taking those aspects and pulling it out and taking it away from the picture of the girl with the flowers in her hair and pulling out those other things that made that picture and put them in isolation or attempt to do it, to isolate them in some way and then make something else built on that, those characteristics. I don't know, I just
forget it.
I knew you did.
It's just very confusing. I mean, it's, looking around, I was thinking, here's a question I have for you. Do these look like they were made now? Or could you imagine these made, say, 30 years ago? That's it.
30 years.
Or 20 years ago.
91?
Yeah, well, that is like 20 years ago?
Yeah.
Oh, all right, 30 years ago. 40 years ago. I guess what I'm getting at is there's something about some of the work here. I mean, some of it actually is almost 20 years old. But, Joe's painting was done in 1993. But I think actually it looks quite current. There are certain characteristics that I think are that fit a lot of the abstraction that I've seen around. So.
Well, it's a super confusing question. And it's a really good one, but it's really super confusing for me because we don't, the contemporary historical moment hasn't been isolated and made discrete. Like, all these things could have been made to me in 1983, for sure. But, we don't know what kind of moment now is.
Or something it's made in 2011 doesn't.
Yeah, it's just like, it's super zeitgeisty. I mean, everything here, it's leaping up to us in the present moment around when it was made. It's just like, I'm not sure.
Well, I don't know. I think Jose's piece, that is so peculiar. I don't know that I would, I don't know if I could place that in an earlier time.
It can't be a terrible Sandrokia.
I don't think so.
Or Chernobyl?
No, it's too controlled. I think it's sort of crude, like Chernobyl, but...
The 93 is grunge, it's, it's like basement and stuff, It's like there is, I don't know, it's like now that I'm thinking about 20 years ago, it's like there's irony, like there's Lance Morrison irony, but there's, it's like...
I got a pen in my pocket.
There's a certain kind of humor, there's a certain kind of position that I don't find that like out of place in the 90s.
Yeah, but to that, I guess, I think that maybe Jose's thing has a sort of distancing or like detached wit about those things. Just like, I feel like something like grunge, there's no wit there. I mean, there's joy and helplessness and irony and sort of like a general dissolution of meaning or of earnestness or something. But I think that would...
Well, it's a funny,
The wit
it's a
pushes it
very
way back.
funny piece. It's a very funny piece because it's very, it's built on an image of Picasso, some of Picasso's heads that he did, and he took a lot of liberties, that's for sure. very peculiar painting. When I first saw it in whatever it is, collage, when I first saw it, I just thought it was awful. And then I couldn't stop looking at it, you know, just this piece that opened up in lots of ways over time. And it's really interesting, and I love the way it talks to the Jim Lewis piece. And not just because the subject matter has a similarity, but just the way the use of the different use of material.
This is one of the questions I've been forming for you for the last couple of days. I've been thinking about like misrecognition. And it's sort of, I don't know. So, you know, you see somebody from a distance and you think that they're somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get closer and you realize they're not. And something about the moment where you realize that they're not,
Mm-hmm.
you have a finer understanding of the specific gestures of the person that you thought that they were.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Right, Sarah would never do that.
right, like, oh, there's a hunch there. Sarah doesn't hunch, but I never thought about Sarah as having good posture until I saw her false cognate hunching.
Sarah being a real person.
Sarah being invented for the
The
person.
person I was thinking about. 'Cause
Our friend Sarah the Hunchback.
It's a girl, it's one of our former students, and
Yeah.
I see her all the time in school, and I see her false cognate all the time in school.
I
And
see.
I'm always like, oh, it's Sarah. Oh, no, it's not Sarah, it's the other one.
Uh-huh.
But the other one, you know, so now I...
It's her stunt double.
It's her stunt double, yeah.
But you think the differences.
But so and that's, to me, the moment when I actually begin to see
Yeah.
the original, or, you know,
Yeah.
is because I can make these sorts of comparisons, which I think
That's really interesting.
is happening all over the place here. And then I just keep thinking about like the sort of deeper implications of wanting to see one thing when you're seeing something else.
I think that's really interesting. And that's one of the things that I think about with all of these. Like, I want to fix them.
Uh-huh.
When I look at them, it's like there's something that I just want to fix. Like,
Yeah, fix.
you know that little painting, your white painting there? There are things falling out of it, and I have this urge to push them back in again.
Please help yourself.
No. But it's not that I would actually do that, but I think that's part of what makes these really interesting when I look at them, and I want to keep going back to them over and over again, is because there's something that's not nailed. There's something that's not quite working in them. And maybe, is that sort of what you're talking about?
That's absolutely it. And then sort of
Yeah.
taking that thought further and thinking about like the flaw in people and the sort of irritability and all of
Yes.
that being the things that you try to fix and also the things that draw you to people in the first place. There's something
that draw you, and then you try to fix them.
right, exactly.
It's like a
But it's like but it's the loose threads and the problems that people present that sort of magnetize you.
Yeah, that's funny.
And because you were just saying the other day that I think I've quoted you 5 times already or something. That painting has to be personal.
Mm.
Now, everybody knows how to paint,
Yeah,
but so there has to be something personal, and I think that's
I think it. But don't you think all art has to be personal?
yes. But I think that there's been a good spate, like since conceptual art or something, of people of systems being good enough or something.
I know, but the people who are drawn to systems, it was very personal for them.
Yeah.
That they had the kind of minds that really were excited by those processes.
I think that's true, but I think that then generations following them have looked at that and have thought, oh, I'm supposed to have a system in order to eliminate whatever personal...
The glitch.
The glitch, right. Like the idea is to perfect yourself for
Then
art.
it became impersonal.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
that was my least favorite career kind of. I don't know, it's just like after
That's
you
the
know,
first year program.
yeah,
Right. Go.
or you know, like yeah, it's totally like for the people who are starting those programs, it was like totally the most like you know, it's like totally almost like religious or something, and then like but then like later or in the 80s or something, you know, where it was like programmatic that you would be that way, you know, like that.
And the meaning was lost.
Yeah, that's like the Dark Ages or something, you know, and
Yeah.
it's like ever since then, I feel like it's like more like a reaction to that or something, you know, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like maybe the unfinished aspects of these is something about like I mean, it goes to the question of like, are these things from 20 or 30 years ago or from now or something? Maybe the unfinishedness is kind of like a condition of their nowness almost, because it's like, you know, all the questions that we're asking, it's like no one can really, you know, they are just these like gaping questions that become more confusing as you plummet, and it's like
but something about the contemporary aspect of the work is the unresolved or the confusion almost. Or I mean, it's like, I guess in every age, it's like you're in confusing times and you don't know, like, is this, you know, everyone thinks that they're in like the end of the world and also like the most kind of like confusing time, and it's like seems contemporary to you when you're in the moment. But it's like something about the confusion or disconnectedness of work now. It's like, I don't know, it does, I feel like perhaps we are in extra confusing times or something, or unprecedentedly confusing times. Perhaps we're not, I don't know, maybe that's a little broad, but I mean, there's something about that. I feel like, I don't know, I sense something about that in a lot of work that I see.
I think that's very true. One thing that happens in periods in like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when everybody was doing sort of gestural kinds of work, when you would walk into a room and you'd see like 30 people in classrooms doing all these different paintings, each painting looked different. You know, they were all personal, they were all unique. And when you see them 30, 40 years later, it's like they all look exactly the same. You know, they're different moves. Everybody makes certain moves, and the palettes are very similar, and everything is astonishing. And so when you see work, when you characterize, we were talking about this earlier, you would think back to the 90s, the early 90s, and you can characterize the work in a particular way. And the one thing that I'm sort of happy about now is that there seems to be, what I've noticed is more of an interest in material practice than there was, say, 10 years ago. And I don't know what people are going to make of it or how it manifests, whether it's in collaging or painting or, you know, whatever. But 10 years from now, we'll look back and we'll see all of this work that looks very different now. It'll all look the same, because there'll be certain intellectual threads that hold things together. That, I don't know, we shall see. But it's interesting now. So, the other question I had for people, you know, when we hung this show, there were 23 participants, and it was hard to hang, and so we ended up hanging it in kind of I was thinking about it afterwards, that the installation is kind of musical. You know, it's like lyrical in a way. And I wonder if that undermines the sort of the idea of the work.
That we made a kind of harmony out of it.
Yeah, made it fairly harmonious.
Right. It seems to have done that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in terms of people's responses.
Yeah. Because we could have just bunched everything on one wall.
It could have been very irritating.
And yeah, exactly.
Well, totally, and that was the question. That's one of the questions. I think, like, how do we sort of emphasize the discord, both of, you know, the discord is present within the object, and sort of like putting these things at difficult sort of car crashes or intersections together instead of sort of. I don't know. I think that the way that the sort of lyricism of the installation eases them in a way, like. I like that.
It's like the way Susanne eases.
Or whatever.
It eases me.
Yeah.
What are you going to do with this?
Yeah, it doesn't defame them or make them toothless or anything.
Yeah.
It's just like, these are, you know, you're like, God, I'm fucked up. And you're like, God, all my friends are fucked up. It's like, oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I have friends, and all the misfit toys can be friends. I don't know.
It's a big pillow.
It's a relief. I think that if the anxiety present or the unease and the neurasthenia in each of these objects were emphasized, it would hurt them too much. So we're talking about sort of like overabundance of sensitivity in these things. Why would you sort of put more weight on that to see if it would crack? Like, because they would. I think that's part of the sort of custodian shit I think these objects have of each other, or you have of all of them. I don't know.
Meaning if it was like more like a survey, like clinical, like let's just see them all without putting them in, what I think for the most part is like, they're in all sort of very ideal viewing points for each of them in terms of like where they're
They're
positioned.
pretty ideal. Yeah.
You know, it's like, I don't know, like Natalie's painting looks very good, sort of waist high. And you know, it's like they have sort of like little cues and yeah, I think if you were saying, you know, this is an investigation into this idea, and I'm gonna like really test it out, it's like you would end up sort of forcing the paintings to be in a position that they wouldn't want to play anyway, so they would, I mean, I'm totally sort of like agreeing with
They hold each
like,
other. I think that's what, I mean, that's the sort of generosity of Suzanne curating the show like this. It's like, I sort of feel held by Suzanne, and they hold each other, and it's like, I have to go back to the door, so don't go too far. If it's people are outside, they can't really.
Well, it's funny because this is a piece, very lovely piece by Sabina Ott. And when Sabina brought her piece in, it was about 5 feet high. 23 people, and I had to ask for small pieces. So it wasn't, to be honest with you, it wasn't really well thought out. And it was only when we began to unwrap the pieces and put them around that they began to talk to one another. But it was very casual. And do I think that the small pieces represent the work? In some cases, yeah. I mean, like the Rebecca Mars, for instance, that looked like her work at the time, because that's from the early 2002 or 3. So it did look like her work at the time, but the work that she's doing now with triangles and everything, it looks, the work that she does now is quite different. So.
Molly talked about seeing somebody from afar and thinking that they were somebody, and then realizing it wasn't them. And I mean, just to maybe talk about whether or not I agree with someone's work looking like them. There's an experience I had where I put on a wig and had a conversation with a friend, and they didn't realize it was me at all.
At close range?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Like it's so the idea of someone's identifying feature.
That was irritable.
That was very irritating.
Let's all make our phones go off at the same time at the end of this.
So I wonder if maybe what you've identified someone's work looking like them is maybe something that that person themselves doesn't identify as. Does that make sense?
Are you speaking personally?
No, not necessarily. I guess I was playing devil's advocate because I thought that lined up in an interesting way.
Well, I did talk to, for instance, when I went to Magali's studio, there was one work I was interested in, and she said, I don't feel that represents me, that's not a direction I want to pursue. And so I didn't choose the work. I chose something that seemed more like what she was interested in, or the direction anyway. So I figure artist knows best. I might disagree with her on that, but I sort of honor that request. I don't think, I'm not sure that artists really know what they look like or what the work that they do should look like. I've found over the years that people tell me what my work looks like, but I don't really know. I didn't know for a long time what it looked like to other people.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we're inherently suspicious of people who think they know what they look like.
Yeah. Yeah. Because the work then looks too pat. Yeah. Like, this is my work. Tell me, what is this?
This is an ongoing conversation between Dana and I about knowing, about
This is the kind of work I do.
yeah, and I know what I would have to do to make it exactly what it would be, and this is the kind of artist that I am, and I know what the reception's going to be on this. And really, thinking that you have a sort of like grip on the.
But it's the perspective is it's like am I a patient person or an impatient person? It's like very hard to tell sometimes, but other people it's like it's obvious to me, like, oh, they're patient people, it's like
Right.
because defining, maybe because like looking and pointing seems like clearer, and defining it from the inside is like fluid and continuous, so it's like categories never really crystallize, so then other people can recognize, but you actually can't, because it's a continuous conversation you have
And that
with
was my
yourself.
point about the Sarah thing, the false cognate person or something, was like, we're pretty good at saying, you know, oh, Diego, he's an impatient person. I'm even better at saying, Diego and Aaron, who's more impatient? Like there's, you know, oh, right, or something. You know, like once you get just these levels are removed or something. Maybe that's really obvious, but I think thinking about a group show in that way as like the thing that offers the kind of distance that you need to see.
The parallax point.
The parallax points, yeah, totally.
It would be interesting to see a show where there was a very deliberate effort to make the work as disparate as possible and see if there was some intrinsic thread that nonetheless existed once the show was up and once people got used to it.
You mean just like a show of various people, and you choose work that doesn't look like them at all.
Where all the pieces in the show are as distinct from every other piece as you know. I suppose you could say that museums are like that, but you know the collection. But there's a lot of effort has been paid to making them, you know, ease one into the next and to have thematic rooms and so on. But the collection is our collections of museums are very disparate. And
yeah, but if you choose, if you choose a group of paintings or works of art from, say, the same 10, 15-year period, they're all going to have underlying similarities, don't you think?
Yeah.
No, regardless of whether they're figurative or abstract.
Yeah, I mean, it would be easy to flag the idea, right? To flog the idea and make it, you know, totally awful. But you know, there's something.
It would be fun, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. I mean, you take among, say, contemporaries, and we all know contemporaries who are extraordinarily distinct each from the other, and you try to make that the most encompassing spread, and see if that if there's something there that speaks for a generation or for a place or a time that to stress that
be fun
to find that.
I think that's a really interesting idea or in a different way, to deliberately pick pieces that oppose each other philosophically. So you would have, you know, perhaps something that is a very minimalist, intense, pure piece next to something that embodies all of the exact opposite philosophical beliefs. And a series of those that would actually be a very interesting show, I think, because you would end up with their similarities would be in the fact that they're so interrelated in their argument, you know, or so reactionary in their arguments. So I think that's a really interesting idea.
That leads to this ongoing sort of conversation with various people about the extremes in a making process. Chris, you just said the other day that everything and nothing thing, other people are kidding. A grad seminar says it all the time. This like thinking about these things, these extremes, whatever they might be, or something, and actually setting up a disparity between two extremes in art making practices between two different artists. And of course, there's going to be all of this interlinking. And I think that the idea of the provisional, I think is maybe what I find most sort of compelling about this, you can say this kind of work, or provisional work, or what this kind of work is maybe trying to do, is that I think it's trying to not do everything or nothing. It's trying to not think in terms of extreme oppositions. It's trying to do something more closer to the ground, maybe a little bit more banal, or a little bit more just provisional. Maybe just a little bit of this. Well, what about if I just kind of do this? What if I just kind of shrug, and instead of like, I'm never going to do that and I always do that? It's like, well, sometimes I kind of do this thing, but I don't really do it very well. I don't know, but maybe I'll do it better when I use a different color.
Right, and like understanding
A
that
shuffling approach.
I understand that whatever drives you to the studio is only temporarily slate anyway, so those things are all sort of stopgap.
Right.
Right, it's intermittent, and
And allowing the stopgap.
the more people say
Exit the studio.
like everything and nothing, the more sort of ridiculous and aspirational it sounds. It's just like, no, you could never produce everything, and you could only have.
I'm so lost.
Okay, sorry.
But, no, I'm really lost what you're talking about. I mean, it's like, so you're talking about getting an idea and being satisfied that you'll never figure out how to complete it, or?
You mean with a provisional approach, or?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I know the whole provisional,
Right.
but you start out and you say, this is good enough, or I don't know what I'm doing, but it's okay, or?
Well, I think it's like in terms of arbitrary mechanism, setting that opposition up as extreme and aspirational, right? All that we could do in the studio is hope to approach nothing, have this sort of like asymptotic relationship to zero. You can almost get there, but if you're producing something, it's still something. On the other side, the idea that you can actually make something that contains everything, that is you, that's like a reasonable surrogate for you, that supplants you.
Yeah.
Both silly.
Gotcha.
So the thing in the middle would be like whatever drives you is only temporarily satisfied. Not like you're setting up failure or doubt, but that it is a stopgap.
Yeah.
You can achieve something, and then later you will need to achieve something else.
Yeah.
And the thing about that being close to the ground, I guess, for me,
Yeah.
so I just made it sound kind of slackerish. I don't really mean it as slackerish, but more
Uh-huh.
just like, oh, look, the paper folded there. How do I
Uh-huh.
feel about the way the paper folded? This staying very close to like, I like the way the tape works on this. This like feels nice on my fingers. Just this like staying in the
Now,
activity.
This
Yes.
sort of immediate
Now.
thing, and
Yeah.
then doing something or not, and moving on.
Right.
Always moving on.
And always moving on. Right.
Instead of sort of thinking, well, I like the way that tape works, but now I can really do something with it.
Now I'm gonna
And make
instrumentalize it and make
Yeah.
the thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, the tape thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think along with what you're saying, there also is kind of like a knowingness, because from what you're saying, it sounds like the way that I'm taking it is that there's this idea of chance and intuition playing a large part in a lot of these works.
Yeah.
But one of the things that struck me when I first came and saw the show, especially looking at some painters that have had like long careers, so you can look back and look at their works in context to the work that they're showing here, it seems like that there's also a lot of knowing resistance to kind of perhaps their previous work or some type of modernist aesthetic that like Joe Baldwin's piece, I think, is a really good example of that, because it has a lot of language of this kind of modernist grid, but then it's also using this like weird cultural, like the symbol of America, and then in kind of a funny way. So it's in some way like resisting the purity of modernism in a knowing way, but then also that painting, a lot of it seems to be based on chance. And so yeah, it like sits in the middle of this zone where they're like, okay, I'm enjoying this mark, but I'm also knowing what I'm doing, and I'm also resisting something, some type of, it's like all of that, I totally agree with it, it's like all mixed in together, and it makes the work very complicated.
And that's why you can't stop looking at it,
yeah,
too.
yeah.
It's a work that feels so incomplete in many ways that I always want to fix it, but not really.
It just seems to be like accepting fuzziness or something, or accepting, it's like, I don't know, the word that keeps coming to my mind, maybe the sort of psychoanalytic, it's like just sort of being okay with the shit that's not okay, or, or being okay with the thing, the fold of paper, like doing something, or actually kind of doing nothing, but like being okay with it being either that or the other, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think in any kind of passive or mellow way, right? I mean, the irritability always destroys whatever passive, mellow, that's cool, man, like, and then I'll just do this other thing. Like, I guess there's not that vocal inflection when I'm saying that.
Undisciplined.
Did I say that? Did you say undisciplined?
No, I just was questioning.
I don't mean undisciplined either.
Undisciplined.
I don't mean that.
Well, if there's a fine line there, you know, there's something is, well, it was, I'll just let this happen. You know, and sometimes there is a kind of underburden of critical underburden there, and it's behind that impulse that is extremely disappointing. But it just, you know, it could be also just lazy, you know, as you look at that phenomenon of having that kind of mix of intuition and.
I mean, here's an example of a piece that that looks so sort of lazy and casual, and actually it was a Van Gogh reproduction that he just tore up and then put back together again with tape. And when I saw it, I just thought it was a wonderful piece, and it reminded me actually of Joe's piece, because it was something that you could see that there wasn't any kind of, he just had this impulse to put things together, and he didn't refine it, just stuck it all together, and where Joe's looks like he painted it in about a half hour, which I think he did, actually. And there's a kind of directness, and it's very hard to do work like that. I mean, and so sometimes you can find that little piece of tape on the floor, and sometimes it can be really just lazy, and other times it can be just the right gesture, but it's kind of hard to tell what it is at the time. So.
I mean, again, to fold things back, like, you know, is the directness of all the work, like, you know, does it make the personal aspect of it much more evident? You know, it's like none of the works I think here have any concealment, really. They're all sort of like, you know, it's like maybe Michiko's is the one that like I could spend the most time sort of thinking about layering, and there's mysteries in it, but I feel like there's this kind of like obviousness to a lot of the moves, just clarity, and then, you know, it becomes a kind of, it's a way of sort of speaking clearly or something. It's a way of sort of, I mean, even if you're sort of circling in your thoughts and you're not saying anything quite clearly, like at least it sounds like you know, and yeah, I guess maybe Dana's might be like the extreme, not clear, you know, but just, yeah, I think that might be like the furthest point, Dana's and Michiko's.
I think I agree on that.
But there's still something about, you know, like that process and Dana's process, which has, you know, it's like evidence is kind of important or something, you know, and I think in that sense, even if there's a lot of buried information, like there's still access to some degree, you know, yeah.
Do you think that Devening's and Dana's are like the two, there could be two spectrums on something which is controlled with a small element of chance with Dan's, and then Dana's, which is more about intuition and chance? That, do you think that those could be two, like those two paintings could have that, could be like at the top and then the bottom of the spectrum, of like a spectrum on this kind of thing that we were talking about like the direct and then indirect mark or something like this? I don't know if I'm explaining that well.
No, I was gonna say, I think I know what you mean in that they're kind of opposites in a sense, you know. It's like that they're definitely not doing the same thing, and you know, it's like Dan's is like this, it's obvious, but there are no marks really. It's like it's all this peel, you know. It's all this like the touch is sort of like hidden, and then Dana's like a lot of touch, but then I don't know. I do see that, but I guess I'm not really sure of I guess I hadn't really been thinking about them so much in contrast with each other, but I guess I do understand some of what you're saying, but I don't know what the conclusion is, like what sense I eventually get to in terms of like which one is doing what.
I don't think of them as that distinct, really. They're you know, the fundamental attitudes have something that holds them together there, and but you know, clearly one's open, painterly thing with very little strategy to it, and and Dan's is got it's formal. There's something formal to it that's holding it in that sphere. But I think it's just an enormous amount of intuitive stuff going on in it. The decisions don't look like mind over matter to me. Very little here looks like mind over matter, which is something that I find scary about the art world. And but in this room, even if my work isn't at all comfortable here, I feel comfortable in this kind of environment because it's all. It feels like there's a huge amount of natural process going on. That matter is, the mind is in the matter.
Right.
It's responsive. Everything it looks like evolutionary, like it's alive in that regard. Like there's no idea being pressed into place. There's nothing here that's didactic. It's all in the swim of people sitting around here. It feels like it's all a fabric.
That's good.
What were you gonna say, Dana? Before?
That's a really nice thing to say. I don't know. I guess maybe this is like an unnecessary quibble, I guess, but I'm kind of confused about. Maybe not confused about the word chance. Like I get intuition, but I think that as far as chance operations, it's like chance or it's chance operations, and I feel like instead of if the fear is or if the motivation is about like the sort of potential laziness of just let this happen or the whoops or something, I feel like I would prefer to talk about this like more rigorously in terms of like setting up the conditions where certain things can happen. And I feel like
Why?
I don't know, because it's the position of the work, it's the strategy of the work. If Judith isn't making obviously many drawings about how to do that thing, but the conditions of her studio are such that these things can happen. And like maybe it's an accident or maybe these things were unpredictable, but like the strategy of the studio, the ideological framework of the studio is actually based on allowing these things to effloresce, to fall, in terms of strategy. Not in terms of like, leaving yourself open enough to the universe to notice your piece of tape on the floor and put it next to something else is a particular, it's a point, it's a position, I guess. And I think that related to all that stuff for me is like,
Right, not cleaning the studio.
Sure,
Like
and like
these
things are, because of this really difficulty of defending a position where you just set up the conditions for shit to happen, I think a lot of these things are irritable because they're super vulnerable in that sense. Just like, I don't know, does that make sense?
Oh, I agree with that. I think there is a vulnerability to the work, which I think is part of the, I know when we used the word irritable, people kept talking about irritable bowel and all of that, and irritating. People kept saying irritating, and I kept saying, no, it's irritable. It's it's hypersensitivity. It's awkwardness. It's all these other things as well. I mean,
I forgot that it was this was the Irritable show.
Oh yeah.
Well, you both so at home, we're in a swim, it's feeling good, there's a dog. That's awesome.
Yeah.
This is twitchy.
We probably should start winding down. Are there things that that you wanted to say that just never came up, or?
I kind of wish like the people here who have work here could maybe just say like, it's maybe a little official, but like say a few words about what they were thinking. It's like about their work.
Yeah, that would be nice. Would you mind saying when you did yours? Yeah, why don't you start? Yeah.
That's the pink one's mine. I got really obsessed with that plexiglass for a while because when you adhered, and this is something that totally happened by accident or the kind of things we were talking about, but I had a piece of tape stuck to the back of one, and anything that adheres to the back of that, I thought that shined through kind of like light, and so that became really interesting to me for a while. And it still is to a certain extent, but that's kind of where those pieces came out of.
And is it tape underneath, or is it's all tape? There's no paint under the
Oh, there is paint as well. It kind of like, I was kind of gluing, yeah, like I had black paint around and I would just use the acrylic black paint to glue the, I would like stretch a whole bunch of tape over it in kind of like a loosely grid pattern, and then like maybe sprinkle some element, like some detritus that I'd ripped off afterwards, and then I would, then I would just glue it together with acrylic glue. Acrylic paint, just like glue it together with that. And so I think a lot of it, I was interested in that surface and then the light showing through, and then this thing which,
It looks like light, but it's actually
yeah, exactly. And that kind of contradiction, and then this idea about, I'm going on here, but this idea about something being very flat and then having this really, this surface that could look like it was like a really hectic surface. That contradiction really kind of interested me. So that's where those came out of.
And Erin's piece is over there.
The parting of the.
And could you talk just a little bit about the material and stuff?
Oh yeah, so that one's just oil paint and blackberries smushed onto there. Sometimes when I'm working with foodstuffs, I'll chew and then spit onto whatever it's being, whatever's accepting it, whatever surface is there. I guess that was the beginning of me thinking of the idea of a negative space being more permanent than the positive space, and that being kind of like this silly play for me. I don't have too much more to say about
Maybe
that
when
one.
you say the negative, you're talking about all the white area?
Yeah, exactly.
Because it has a weightiness to it that has a, sort of pushes forward.
And it's less fugitive, right? It's a material that's
Mm-hmm.
not going to fade.
It doesn't function like this background with the markings of the raspberries or blueberries.
That one's blackberries, yeah.
Yeah. You know, it keeps looking different. I think that the blackberries are doing something strange.
Yeah.
And
either chalky or drier.
Right, but and that's like with the larger ones, I'm not mixing the oil paint in, so I think there's something going on with the oil as it's gassing off or drying out or whatever. That's I mean, the whole thing's irritable.
we should probably photograph it.
Yeah.
50 years from now.
Right.
And Molly's piece.
Oh, Diego's too.
Where Diego's doing that stuff.
Well, you know, I worked with Suzanne for a while in the office, and I think I remember one day telling her that I was done with drawing. I had made my last drawing, and I feel like Suzanne was always a person that was very encouraging of my sort of 2D work that never gets to see the light of day ever.
I know.
But I really felt that I made that drawing, and I was like, I'm done. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. And like drawing is what I've always like done. It's been the constant. And there's a video up at Heaven now that's totally about that, where I'm talking about this while I'm on the toilet, about how drawing used to be a place where everything seemed so open, and I was so pleasantly surprised by everything that my hand did, and sort of the ways that I could sort of trick myself into doing things that were kind of new and different. And then after, you know, it's been, you know, like a good solid 20 years of drawing, like I just see only my limitations in my drawings. I see only like the things that I kind of can't get away from. And so I thought it was, you know, when Suzanne was like, oh yeah, like would you like to be in the show? I was like, yeah, like, and I knew the piece I wanted to put in. It's really a sort of like pissy, like slightly pissy piece. And I still made drawings since, and they're all sort of the last one. And I'm just so sick of it. And then the frame, I bought the really cheap Blick frame, and then when I saw that Noah had a really nice frame and Brian's had a really nice frame, I was just like, I gotta spruce my frame up. So I just I made it spruce. It's fake spruce.
But that's so funny. I mean, the drawing was always your very strong suit, and this is why it's so complicated for you.
Yeah, well, it's what carried me, I think, throughout. It's where That's why I got A's in art classes.
I mean, that's something that's faced by a lot of people, that, you know, it's like you have this really strong, this thing that you're really good at, and then what?
Yeah, it shines too brightly. I must turn away.
Radiant gift.
That's a piece that I made during graduate school. Probably during the time that I was advising with you. I think it was the last semester of graduate school.
Yeah.
So I finally started sort of opening up. I've been working very hard to get many heavy ideas into work and thinking about text and making these text drawings, paintings, heavy things, and then compressing them. And everything was just about all of these ideas that had to get in. It was definitely the everything track. And I think at some point during those striped paintings you suggested, well, what about a grid? Which had never occurred to me. And then, so this one is made out of a piece of wood that I found in the wood shop. I would go through the wood shop being in the performance building. And then the spray painted grid on the left hand side is from a grate that I got off the heater in somewhere in the Shark building. And yeah, and so I started wrapping all the things that I found. And then, so the other thing that blew my mind was that you suggested that it seemed like I enjoyed following chance, like letting a chance operation happen and doing something with it. And you just find this
Gosh, I
thing.
don't remember any of this, but
Maybe looking back, I think, right, the grid and chance, these are pretty standard ideas, but like, I honestly,
that's funny, it's when you're ready for them,
right.
They're sort of like
And
everyday things, and then all of a sudden, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I always like that piece, and this is Yaya's piece, the upside down something around a cat.
Yeah. Yeah, when you visit my studio, you wanted the cat painting to be in the show, but later you were sending out that this size should have been smaller. So just decided to do another cat painting, and I did with that machine that I paint with. It's just one cutter that I use, paintbrush instead of the cutter, and send the file like 20-25 times and pick the piece of it 10 by 12 and stretched it.
So it's your painting machine that did this?
Yes, it was the file. Like I just let it happen, to see what chance brings, and it was very impersonal and with abstract kind of. It's representational abstract art, and we were talking about that, like this process, like making abstract art is a lot like personal, like you have a personal process and maybe more feeling in it and stuff, but this one doesn't have it. And the only moment that that I feel like that connection and really enjoy it is that when I just stretch it and make the decision.
And then it becomes this sort of personal investigation of like exactly what happens.
And then like now I can see myself.
Yeah.
Where does the cat come from?
It's a kid drawing thing. I did all this animal based on kids' drawing book. Because I thought of like me and the machine, we are young and like we are like this poetic,
The drawing books are like one of those like 50 mammals you can draw type of thing, or what's the books are like instructional on how to learn how to draw a cat?
Like different books, but like little step by step, like how to draw things. And it was perfect that you turned it around. That's fit the content the best way. Yeah. No, it doesn't.
I'm glad you were okay with it.
I love it. Yeah.
And then let's see.
Antonia?
Oh, it's funny. I was thinking when someone said, "Is our artist works representing each artist?" And I was just thinking for myself, because the found is definitely not what I'm kind of maybe being mostly represented, or if we speak about scale, or in terms of I don't know, in any aspect. Then I thought twice, and I thought the way I approached this piece, and it was I really wanted to use because I use so many materials in my paintings, so many things that are not within the painting range in terms of they don't come from paint, or I don't know, they're not associated with paint, so I wanted to use the same kind of processes that I've been applying to my other works, but using only painting materials. And it's funny because I did so, and it still looks as my other works, as if I were using some other materials. So I think it's also the way that I approach the imagery or the composition is, I think it's different than my other more figurative works, but at the same time I think there is something really similar, and also even though the scale is different, I think there's still, I don't know, I was just thinking that it's still representing it, that it's still me, and that it doesn't matter that it's, at first sight, it's so obviously different, because I think it's kind of still the same. I was just
Yeah, because it seems like something that you did, and it was not unfamiliar to me, and I saw that it seemed to fit with the rest of your work.
Nice, and that's what I seem to get as a response from people. But if it's seen from someone who doesn't know me, I think they'll see the works completely as different body works.
Yeah. Sabina, would you like to say something about this decapitated piece?
I've just been trying for a long time to figure out how to reinvigorate painting for myself and have them not really be paintings as I understand paintings to usually be. And so I've been working for a long time with styrofoam and styrofoam. And so this shape was a residue from a sculpture I made this summer, and it was sitting around in the studio for a really, really long time, months and months and months and months. And then I put the canvas on it, and then it sat around for like months and months, and you know, it was a very slow becoming thing. And it was, and so it was just growing, and I've really been trying to use mirrors a lot as another kind of reflective surface, and surfaces that are self-reflect, you know, reflect onto the viewer, but reflect the painting. So it has a kind of double subject-object relationship. And so that was really great to have a place for this to go in its capitated and decapitated state. I mean, it was really in progress. The whole thing's been really in progress for a long time. So this, for me, the chance encounter part, though, the part about being relaxed and permeable about the things I make, was what was really called out in its best sense. I suppose when I was adjusting for the show, but I have to admit that Susanne and I had a really long, detailed email exchange where I was saying, "How big can I make it?" And she'd say, "I don't want it to be really big. It has to be," and I'd be like, "Well, how about 48 inches high?" And finally, you had written, "Oh, okay," And so I was really pushing. It was interesting, my impulse to be a space hog, and to really fill whatever space I had access to, which is an impulse that I have. In case you didn't know.
No, I have the same impulse, so I understand
So
it.
it was very interesting. So I really did actually learn a lot in terms of studio practice, the whole interaction around this piece, and then what the base ended up becoming this whole thing. So it was really, really good. And I felt actually when I was in here, I was really excited about the fact that everything felt very interdependent. That I didn't really see that many of the pieces would hold by themselves certainly, but that there was the relational aspect between them was the most important thing. And I remember walking in when you had installed pretty much everything and just going, because the negative space of the gallery was so interesting and worked so well. And so it really did feel like walking inside a painting, being in this space. So I was happy that this would be the thing people would trip on.
They can watch themselves tripping.
See their foot rise.
Yeah.
And I was also glad that for the other sculpture as well as being sort of the shards, and I liked that piece very much.
The conversation between these two is very funny.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay,
I made that. One, I brought it here.
The beautiful painting.
Oh, thanks. I brought it here. What it's called, Head Like a Roof.
Eric, is that really what you have to say?
Yeah, for sure.
seems fitting. And the painting was made in a really small room, and most of the paintings I made are that small so far. And it's like, it's just kind of like, I don't know. I guess it's nice what you're saying with the relational aspect. It's kind of like really nice to see it in the context of this show, because I feel like those paintings are totally just like these you know, I don't know, they're totally like neurotic, I think, and it's like, it's nice, it's like, here it can breathe and be in a community and be happy, and it kind of like, melts into each other, you know, that painting will be different to me now, and I don't know, yeah, it's like, maybe my future paintings, I don't know, it's like, it's very nice to see it in
It's
this
like a
context,
home.
you know,
Yeah.
because I think my headspace, when I was making that, was different than my headspace now, too. It just
Good.
feels like, wow.
It's funny, when I look at it, I really get this funny, like, double jolt of the paranoia of the eyes.
Yeah.
And the generosity and comfort of the breasts.
That's me.
Sorry. No. I'm ready.
Can we just do one more? Rico, did you want to say something about your broken painting here? We didn't break that incidentally, but it was like that.
What?
Is it broken?
It's been opening more and more.
Oh yeah, it's gently open. It's a flower.
Well, I was interested in making this like sculptural paintings, I guess, like breaking with the structure a little bit. So with this one, I literally like broke the structure. I was interested in like creating expansion, not through adding something, but actually through taking something out, like taking material instead of adding. And I thought that was interesting. And also, what else?
Because you had a whole series of paintings that were windows and interiors. And
and this one also, I like that like acknowledges itself to be like a painting, but really not easy. And I think that was irritable.
Thanks, everybody. I think we got everybody.
Can we say on behalf of Caesar, thanks Suzanne so much.
Yeah, seriously.
Sweet.
Yeah, totally. And thanks for coming back and doing this, and thank you for being on the show.
Oh, yes, it was fun to hang out.
The color of